Hey guys, it's Will with First Watch, the show that's part review, part reaction. Today we're starting a series within a series. I got this box set of Cold War spy thrillers. There's 6 of them. You should rush out and buy this thing if you like spy movies because I've only watched 3 of them so far, so full disclosure. But I think it's like $7. I got it for like $7. So it's like 6 movies, $7, where it's like $1.15 per movie, thereabouts. So it's like dirt fucking cheap. And these are not like, oftentimes when you buy these sets, they're like movies from production companies you never heard of and they don't look very good and whatever. These are like Columbia movies. So these are like legit movies that are very good that I think just don't have much of a historical reputation for whatever reason. So I'm going to be diving in and kind of talking about them and my impressions of them, seeing them, because these are all movies I'm seeing for the first time. But I'm a huge fan of, I should add up front, I'm a huge fan of like 60s espionage movies. I love like the Sean Connery James Bond movies, Roger Moore James Bond movies. I know this came out in the 70s, but like all that kind of stuff from that era. I really love the Avengers, the TV show, and like that kind of stuff. So the first movie in this set is called Man on a String, and it came out, I think, in 1960. It says right on the back, so that's helpful. 1960. Now I'm gonna mess up the placement of our DVD. But Ernest Borgnine is the lead in it, and it's a really, really interesting film. So it's like this weird combination of like a Dragnet type show where there's like a voiceover, and these FBI, they're not actually the FBI, they're like some agency that's so secret the public hasn't even heard of it. It's like one of those types of things. But there's like a voiceover of this guy being like, now our men are going to work putting together a layout of the Russians' home so they know where to spy on him. But then it has this really well done, so that part of it is like very dated, but there's this really well done like Hitchcockian thing about this guy who gets in way over his head with this kind of like spy plot where he gets stuck between these 2 agencies and he's in an impossible position and he has to do the best that he can in that position. So the guy is played by Ernest Borgnine, and he is a Russian-American film producer. So the movie has all this amazing location photography. That's one of the best things about the movies in this set. If you love like movies shot on location that capture like the time and the place, like this was shot in, I guess, 59 or 60, and it's got Los Angeles, New York City, Berlin, Switzerland. They somehow managed to shoot in Moscow. Like on the streets of Moscow. Like it's really interesting. And those sequences almost take on this documentary like, and the sequences in Berlin too, aesthetic of like just shooting the faces of these people and like showing you who's living in Berlin at the time and who's living in Moscow at the time. And the LA stuff is really, really cool to see LA at that time. And so he's this movie producer, he's Russian-American, and there's a Russian diplomat he's become friends with. He introduces him around to people and stuff like that, and that guy turns out to be KGB's man in the US. So he's caught up in this spy thing, and the American agency comes to him and is like, you know, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to you, and you're going to go to jail for all this time unless you help us bust these Russians. And the Russians are like, oh, well, we have your brothers who are still living in Russia, and we're not going to give them to you unless you help us. So he's basically in this impossible position, right? And so he goes to Berlin, and the U.S. sets up this like cover for him where he's producing these movies in Berlin. And this is one of the really interesting aspects of this movie. It is about the use of cinema as propaganda and as a tool for government agencies to accomplish things and communicate things. And it is a movie that is, in a way, propaganda for the American side of the Cold War. So it's really interesting, but it has a 3-dimensionality to how it almost shows the people who are caught in the Cold War as victims. And it's not that the US are the villains or the Russians are the villains, but these 2 giant states who are warring with one another for what the movie perceives to be essentially no real reason. All the people who are caught up in that, whose lives are ruined or affected, and who have to go through these tragedies or whatever, those are the real victims of the Cold War. And it's like this giant machine that these people can't escape. And that's a really interesting perspective. And then there are scenes where Ernest Borgnine's character, after he goes to Berlin, ends up going to Russia. And those are like very, very Hitchcockian sequences that are really cool. There's this really funny bit where he goes to like the KGB school where they're teaching these like young Russians how to be Americans, and he's asking them questions, and he's like, you, sir, where are you from? And he's like, I am from Ohio. I like football. My Russian accent is terrible, but it's really funny. So it really is like, it's walking this line of being like dated and corny, and it's almost like they're trying to appeal to like a really like drive-in movie theater like TV watching crowd, and then being like a really good Hitchcockian like character-driven thriller about the tragedies of people being stuck in the Cold War. So I would highly recommend this movie for people who are like interested in kind of like studying film history and looking at these things and seeing how they came together in the location photography of that time, or who just really love spy movies. Ernest Borgnine is fantastic in this movie. Like, I know him from like a lot of the supporting roles that he played in the more famous movies he's in. I think he's in From Here to Eternity and stuff like that. But he, like, his performance in this movie is phenomenal. It almost reminds me of, is it Henry Fonda, who's in The Wrong Man, the Hitchcock movie, and that kind of like really sad, like conflicted, like everyman type performance. So this is a Cold War, it's a box set of 6 movies. They're all from Columbia Pictures. And like I said, you can get this for like dirt cheap wherever you buy your DVDs. And it's really, really worth checking out. I'm going to be doing little reactions, reviews to every movie in this. This first one is called Man on a String. Ernest Borgnine, you should definitely check it out.